Okay, I am very happy to be here. And yes, I think everybody's a little bit timid around microphones. I especially have a little phobia about microphones because I've always played in bands since I was a kid. And they microphones will bark at you sometimes, and they give you the strangest feedback. We know that, don't we? And so you're always kind of on guard against um, squelching and all kinds of noise. And then sometimes people go, "Oh, lip up, lip up." That means you got to get really right here before you can really be heard. And you hear the difference between that and this. And so when you're singing, of course, if you're not really cognizant about the mic, you're going to kind of go all over the place, and you see what will happen unless you hold it in your hand. So I've long been a microphone phobic person. Is that a word, or did I just make it up? So I debated about whether to sing a little song for you today. I didn't bring my guitar, but I'm going to sing just a little bit of it for you because I thought it was just so right for the occasion. And you may have heard it, but it's a real twisted version of an old gospel song called Give Me That Old Time Religion. And so ordinarily the verse would go like this. Give me that old time religion. Give me that old time religion. Give me that old time religion. It's good enough for me. And then traditionally you would sing the next verse, which is, it was good for Paul and Silas. It was good for Paul and Silas. It was good for Paul and Silas. And that's good enough for me. And so the twisted version kind of slides in with a verse like this. We could worship Aphrodite. She's oh so strong and mighty. She looks good in her. That's good enough for me. Give me that old time religion. Give me that old time religion. Give me that old time religion. It's good enough for me. We could worship like the Druids, drinking strange and potent fluids, running naked through the woods. Kind of give it a little stretch there, That's good enough for me. Give me that old time religion. Give me that old time religion. Give me that old time religion. It's good enough for me. We could worship Brother Buddha, who we're going to talk about today. To me, there is none cuter. Comes in silver, brass, or geniuses. That's good enough for me. Give me that old time religion. Give me that old time religion. Give me that old time religion. That's good enough for me. Yeah, give me that old time religion. Give me that old time religion. Give me that old time religion. That's good enough for me. Thanks. You were very, very right on target with your lyrics. So I guess my favorite verse would have to be the Buddha verse because it comes in silver, brass, or Buddha to, to suit your taste and your decor at home. Uh, I've I've been chased by Buddhism for years. And I like some of you, we had to talk about this earlier. My first exposure was the book Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. And this was, I guess, produced in the late 60s. And I probably read it in 69 or 70. I was a good hippie, um, card carrying, and interested in everything. I started practicing yoga then. And so I read Siddhartha, the book, and later on they came out with a movie that was really quite good too. The book isn't totally accurate to the real story of the Buddha, has a different ending. In Buddha's case, the real Buddha, um, When he died, it really shook up all the people around him. He was a rich dude, Siddhartha, when he was a kid, had a wealthy family. They would be like kings, but they didn't call him that. And this was in northern India. And this was at a time when where he lived was not really part of India yet. There was no India then. It was just a bunch of little fiefdoms almost. And so his father was a wealthy man, and he had gone to a seer, to get a little reading on his newly born son. Tell me about what my son is going to be. How should I raise this person? And so the seer said, well, I'll tell you what, it's going to go one of two ways. Your son is going to be either a great warrior or he's going to be a spiritual person. And so his dad said, I'm kind of leaning towards the warrior part. We'd like to expand the kingdom, maybe take in the neighbors next door, get a few more gold coins in the till. But what happened was just the opposite. His father did everything he could to see that Siddhartha would become this great warrior. He shielded him, protected him from the outside world. He stayed in the palace gates. He didn't know anything but pleasure. He was always had the finest of everything. Anything that you could think of that they could get to eat, was his. It was available. And then all of a sudden, one day, he managed to get out and go for a chariot ride. Out on the chariot ride, he saw an old woman by the road, and he asked the driver, he said, well, what's wrong with her? And the driver said, well, young sir, she's old, and she's a little crippled. And he said, well, does that happen to everybody? And the chariot driver said, well, yes, really, everybody gets old and they get infirm. He was shocked. So he couldn't quit thinking about this. It troubled him so much that he would ask his parents questions, and they would say, don't worry about that stuff, son. You have plenty of time to live your life. You're a young man. Siddhartha ended up getting married and had a kid of his own, but he did keep making these little excursions out into public places. He'd have to do that without his father's permission or knowledge. And one time he happened upon a funeral pyre, and he said, what's going on here? And I said, well, the guy died, and this is how we take care of the dead. We burn them. And he said, well, does everybody die? And was surprised to find out that, yes, indeed, everybody dies. Well, that story's a little fantastic. You can't imagine really growing up not knowing that people get old, get sick, and die. But that's how it happened for him. And it bothered him so much that he said, I want to find out what this is all about. Why do we have so much suffering in the world? Why are we victims of the world? Isn't there anything we can do so that this won't happen to us? And so he had learned that there are people, and in this part of India at the time, there were a lot of people wandering around as holy people. A lot of them lived in the woods, lived in caves. They would be separate from society. And in particular, it was the fad amongst these people to try to seek some kind of enlightenment through physical renunciation. And basically what that means, you deprive yourself of the things that you need to live. You don't eat much food. You don't drink much water. You don't have fun. What you do is you want to make yourself so miserable that somehow you get enlightened from that. So Siddhartha tried. He fell in with this gang of folks who were doing just that. And so he realized at some point during all of this that he was getting more and more frail, more apt to be sick. And so one day he realized, if I keep this up, I'm going to kill myself, and I will not have achieved what my original goal was to find out why we suffer on this earth. So he, after going with several teachers, and probably more than you could shake a stick at, He never found the answer that he was really wanting. And that was, why do we suffer? Why do we have unhappiness in our lives? And so at one point in his life, he said, you know what? I'm going to sit here under this tree and I'm not getting up until I know the answers. Well, he was there for days and he suffered from what probably could be called hallucinations. Maybe they are fantasies. Maybe they are enlightened messages from somewhere else, but all of a sudden, he got it. He figured it out that we are doing this to ourselves. Now, the thing that really strikes me so much about Buddha was this happened 2,500 years ago. This was 500 years before the birth of Jesus. Just think that our country is only about 230 years old. And when you think back 230 years ago, how different it was from what it is now. So think about this one guy who wanted to figure this out. So this happened, like I said, well over 2,000 years ago, and his message, his teachings are still relevant and used today. Well, it's kind of a strange thing, the story of Buddhism. Here he started this. The first thing he wanted to do after he had this enlightenment, this realization that we kids are shooting ourselves in the foot with this because we're spoiled little brats and we want what we want when we want it, and we don't want to lose what we've got. And because we're so hardcore at that, we are miserable. He said, that's it. So he went back to his buddies that he used to hang out with and not eat with. And he said, dudes, I have got it. Let me tell you what I've discovered. So when he walked into the group, they looked at him and they could tell something was different. His demeanor had totally changed. He was not the same person that they used to not eat with. And so they said, what happened? Who are you? Who are you now? And he said, I'm awake. And so the word Buddha means awakened. So I am a Buddha. I am awakened. And he sat down and he told them about his sitting until he got the answers. So one of the things about this that he discovered, he came up with something sort of formulaic, and that there are four noble truths. Now, this is what we usually come across if you have any exposure to Buddhism at all. You're going to find these four noble truths. And one of them is, you're going to suffer. In this life, we're really likely to suffer a lot. And then the second one was, we bring this on ourselves. This is the second noble truth. How do we do that? Well, we're greedy. We want everything. We're little spoiled brats. We can't get enough of things. More is not enough. The other thing is, too, we get really angry with people when they don't do what we want them to do. And so then we build resentments toward them that can develop into hatred, which is one of what he calls the three poisons. And so if we build this kind of relationship with people, if they don't do what we want them, we get mad with them, angry with them, or get back with them, or in extreme cases, we'll shoot them or poison them or push them over a cliff if they get close enough. Now, not you, of course. I'm sure you would not really do that. But to an extreme, when people get so caught up in this, they will do those things. We will do those things. The capacity to do those things is within all of us. So the third point that Buddha wanted to make in his discovery is, there's a remedy for this. There is a remedy for this. We don't have to do this. And it's very simple, but it's quite difficult. And so his last little noble truth was when he laid out the prescription for how to overcome this. and it was called the Eightfold Path. And it was 8 little things, 8 little tiny things that you could do that would rid yourself of having a miserable life caused by greed, wanting, anger, getting angry. And, you know, I know you've all heard this about getting angry with somebody doesn't really do much against them, right? You're pointing your finger. Arthur mistreated me. You know, he dissed me. You know, I'm not ever going to talk to him again. Well, does Arthur know that? Probably not. Does he know that you're angry with him? Probably not. So, but how do you feel? You're boiling inside. So that's when Siddhartha said, that's a poison you cannot afford to have, and you can overcome it. So he laid out this little eightfold path for everybody, and he shared those teachings with everybody. So when he did this, he was attracting so many people to him to listen to everything he had to say. And just being around him made people feel good. If you've ever been around somebody who is so loving toward you and who will listen to every little stupid thing we say, you know, and still love you and listen, you know, the kindest thing we can do is to give somebody our attention. The worst thing we can do is tell them our bigger fish story. That's nothing. Let me tell you about the time I went fishing and my fish was so much bigger than yours. But if we can learn to give them that simple thing, there's an entire book written by a woman named Brenda Whalen. She also famous for writing this book called If You Want to Write. And it's her experience is teaching young people how to write. But anyway, she said, the only thing that you can really do for people that will make a real difference in their life is to listen to them, is to just listen to them. Don't tell them your 2 cents worth. Don't give them advice, really. Don't quote Bible verses. Don't tell them go get the Eightfold Path. Study that. But if you do listen to people, they will love you like no one would ever love you. And it's sometimes really hard to do. So with this teachings spread. Siddhartha became famous. Everybody wanted to be with him. They wanted to study with him. They wanted to be his followers. They wanted to be monks. They wanted to live with him. Well, you know, he was on this little tour. In India, you know, they have a terrible rainy season. So when it wasn't raining, he was out traveling the country with his followers, and they were teaching anybody who would listen. And then during the rainy season, they would hole up inside caves or sometimes dwellings or buildings that kings would let them use during the rainy season, the rich people. And so it spread and spread and spread, and then he died. They were shocked. They couldn't imagine a life without him. So they gathered together and they said, we've got to remember the things that he taught. We collectively have to remember. His cousin was a man named Ananda, and Ananda had a gift for memory. And so as they gathered, they tried to remember and keep in their memory these teachings of the Buddha. So because Ananda was with him more than anybody, he remembered better than most anybody and more than anybody. And so for the next couple of 100 years, they passed the teachings down orally because most of the people there were illiterate. And if you wrote something down for them, they couldn't read it. So it became a critical skill for monks during this time to be able to remember well, to remember these things. And incredibly, these teachings survived until about 100 years before the current era, when it was first written down. So just think, for 400 years, the tradition was passed orally and stayed intact. Well, if you've ever played that game, Gossip, where you get on one end and you go, Susie has on stupid shoes. And the next person said, Susie likes to hang out with Jews. And then the next person said, Susie drinks too much juice. But that did not happen in this case. Pretty much they got it right. So one of the people in the history of Buddhism, one of the people who had the most impact was this rich guy. He too was like Siddhartha. He had his own little fiefdom. His name was Ashoka or Asoka, depending on how you want to try to pronounce it. But anyway, he was the grandson of the king, the warrior king, who drove Alexander the Great's army out of what was to become India. His grandpa was famous for that. So he was too a famous warrior. And again, it was all about getting more and more and more. We need a bigger kingdom. This one's just too small anymore. And besides, those people over there have a lot of good fertile ground, and we could use that, to get some stores for our silos here. We need more. So Ashoka set about just beating the hell out of all of his neighbors and trying to get everything that he could from them, until one day, when he was walking through what was the battlefield the day before, a Buddhist monk passed by and was so serene and so calm and so, I don't know, he couldn't not look at him and he couldn't not speak to him. So he walked up and he said, "What's going on with you? You seem so peaceful. What, doesn't this bother you? All these dead people lying around?" And he said, "I'm awake." Now, where have we heard that before? So Ashoka said, "Well, what do you mean by that?" And so he was able to teach Ashoka. And Ashoka had this epiphany that really changed his life and the course of Buddhism, because he decided to be a Buddhist king. And so what that meant was he changed all the rules, And now what it is, you study, you become aware, you want to be aware of the teachings of Buddha. So he promoted that in his little kingdom. And not only that, he was so on fire with this that he had his sons and daughters act as missionaries and sent them to the far reaches of what he knew as the world. They went to Egypt, they went to Greece, they went to the Holy Land, they went to Macedonia, and then it also spread east, down through the south of what would one day become India, to Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka, and up into China, to Tibet. And so that was his family and the friends of his kids that he sent out to tell people about the teachings of the Buddha. Now, this was still quite a bit of time before the birth of Jesus. So one of the things that he did along with this effort, this missionary effort, was he put up these big pillars, stone pillars. They were gigantic. And he put them up in these places, and it had the teachings of the Buddha on it. Not all of them, but most of them had the Four Noble Truths, and so people everywhere were exposed to this. Now, in my fantasy about all this, and I'm not the only one who has this, I think that when Jesus was born, he probably was aware of Buddha's teachings. These pillars, some of them still survive. They're still around. None of them are totally intact, but they're still there. And so I'm sure that if there were these pillars in Greece and Egypt and in the Holy Land, Macedonia, all over the known world to him, he could not have helped but get exposed to this. That's another story for another day, but I like to think about that sometimes because their teachings are so much alike. So Ashoka was the greatest missionary that you could have imagined, who did all of this at his own expense and sent it forth. And so what we have is we have these teachings that have been pretty well preserved, although in the early days of the spread, when it started going places, like in the 1400s, there was a Muslim invasion of India. And during this invasion, they wiped out the Buddhist community in India. They sent them flying. Hinduism somehow survived and stayed in India. They too were, you know, they were a little more, they were more like to battle than the Buddhists were. The Hindus would fight the Muslims. The Buddhists didn't fight. They just left. So what happened is, in the place where Buddhism was born, where Siddhartha was born, where he gave his teachings all his life, where Ashoka, you know, spread the word through his missionary efforts, in this birthplace of Buddhism, there were no Buddhists. So it was up to the folks who lived in these areas where the missionaries had gone to keep up, I hate to use the word, keep up the faith. But they did. It's like in Tibet, you know, they had such a rich embrace of Buddhism. They combined it with their local religion, which happens everywhere Buddhism goes, happens everywhere Christianity goes. It gets, you know, bound up in the local customs and traditions. So what a great thing. It went everywhere. But what happened also was differences emerged until at one point, there became a lot of envy over our version of Buddhism and your version of Buddhism, to the degree that there are now 4 ways you could divide the Buddhist philosophy up. And so one of them is called Theravada, and you'll read this word if you read much about Buddhism. Theravada, that means the wisdom of the elders. And so this particular branch of Buddhism only looks at the earliest teachings of the Buddha, just the early stuff. There are a lot of writings based on the early teachings of the Buddha, and they're still in print and have been in print for a long time. And the original written version of this was not in Sanskrit, but in Pali, which was the common language of the people around that area. So the Theravadins only want to look at the original teachings. I'm sort of in that group, I think. I care a lot more about what he was trying to tell us than the newer versions or the commentaries. So there is another whole group, and these are called Mahayana Buddhist. And Mahayana means great vehicle. Yana means vehicle. So the Mahayana people, feeling a little superior, started calling the Theravadins Hinayana, which means lesser vehicle. So you've got little divisions and little irks going on all the time. So with this new group, they had additional commentary from other teachers. And they said, well, a lot of people have gotten enlightened since Buddha. Let's listen to them too. And so there's a lot of scripture from other people since the time of Siddhartha. And in Tibet, that is probably the most ornate and complicated of the types of Buddhism. And they have decided that they're their own branch now, Vajrayana. And so that's really more about ceremonies and about blessings and rituals and little practices that go along with all of the Buddhist teachings that sort of grew and evolved in Tibet. And so when these folks were driven back out of Tibet by the Chinese, they had to walk for months to get out with their lives. And then they were received in India, and pretty much that made Buddhism come full circle back to where it started. Well, in Sri Lanka, where Ashoka had sent his children, one of his children as a missionary, they were sticking with the original version. And they had all these years in Sri Lanka, they had maintained Buddhism and maintained what would be the most original version of it, based solely on the teachings of Siddhartha. But they had sort of gotten a little fatigued with it until a couple of folks, you may have heard of a woman named, they called her Madame Blavatsky, and then her sidekick, Colonel Olcott. And this was around in the late 1800s. And they wanted to study the original form of Buddhism. So they went to Sri Lanka and made a really big deal to the Sri Lankans about them having this treasure of the original stuff that they still had. And so the Sri Lankans said, well, yeah, we sure do, and kind of put their thumbs in their suspenders and got proud again. And all of a sudden things changed in Sri Lanka. They started renovating their shrines and making their lineage more important, because they just sort of gotten used to it and were doing it like we say the blessing at the evening meal. Thank you for God for all this food, and I hope there's enough gravy for me. So that sort of created a renaissance at the time in Sri Lanka. And it was about that time they decided they were going to change their name from Ceylon to Sri Lanka, which means Holy Lanka. And so it's really interesting how Buddhism has had this little life of its own and goes all these different places. So that's three of them. We've got Theravada, the wisdom of the elders. We've got the Vajrayana, which is the Buddhist type. And then we've got Mahayana, which means, that's probably like Japan, China, that's their version of it. And now there's a fourth school of Buddhism that most scholars are recognizing, and it's called Western Buddhism. That's what we have in our country, mostly. Now, there are, Buddhism originally came to America through California and Hawaii, from Japan and China. So that was the kind of Buddhism that we had for the longest time. And then later on, we started getting exposed to the Tibetans, and through Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese version of Buddhism. And then there were the beat poets, who were exposed to that, and that sort of brought everybody up a step. It got on our radar in this country through the beat poets. And so that made us curious enough to kind of dig deeper. Let's look, let's find some more, let's find out about this. And so finally, we got to the point we really got to the meat of the matter about what Siddhartha taught. And so now that we have that, and we don't feel like, oh, we have to use the Tibetan version, we don't need to have their blessings in order to want to walk the Eightfold Path. So it's really kind of interesting that we've had in the past 50 years in this country some really unusual people who came here from other countries bringing the teachings of the Buddha. And most of them brought their culture with them. The Tibetans in particular, they really want to maintain all of their rituals and all of their little chants and incantations and their mythology. And they have this whole realm of a belief system that, there are Buddhists that are living in heaven now and that they would be coming soon. And some of them probably won't because they have too much to do where they are. But then a few of them will. And so it's gotten kind of complicated and confusing and away from the original teachings of the Buddha, which had none of that. In fact, when the early people wanted to talk to the Buddha, they asked questions. Well, so do you believe in God? They wanted to know if he believed in God. And so he said, well, that's not really important to me. He said, what's important is that we find a way to stop our suffering. And they'd say, well, do you believe in reincarnation? He said, it'd be more important for you to really focus on what's going on in front of you right now than whether your past lives were as Cleopatra or your future lives, or you're going to be an Indian princess somewhere. And so he kept trying to bring it back, and they were always trying to figure things out. And so one of the most interesting confusions to me about his teachings was that the Buddha did refer to reincarnation. He made several references to it, but not in the way that it was believed where he was at the time, which was when you die, then your consciousness goes into another body and you kind of pick up where you left off, only you've got this reward and punishment thing going on based on your good and bad karma. And karma is just a word for actions. So Buddha said, that's not an accurate way to look at it, but they didn't want to hear that and couldn't really take it to the degree that he said, because one of my questions, I have a friend who's a Buddhist and meditation teacher. And so I said, well, all right, if nothing of us survives like the Buddha says, then what's the incarnation made of? What is it exactly? To whom do these good and bad actions belong once you die if there's nothing of you that goes before? And he was really adamant about saying that nothing of you survives. There's not really a soul. Don't worry about that. Worry about what's in front of you to do today, how you act today. Focus on that. So when I asked my friend, I said, okay, so if there is karma and nothing survives, then whose karma is it? And he looked at me and he said, it's the world's karma. And so that wasn't an answer I really wanted to hear. And I had to work on that for a while. And I thought, well, that sort of makes sense. It doesn't belong to us. But when you look at what people are going to inherit from us when we all die, they inherit whatever actions we took while we're living now. They get what we did. If we pollute the planet, they inherit it. If we bomb the bejesus out of our enemies, they get to inherit that too. So I started thinking about that and I said, well, gosh, that really kind of takes a lot of burden and guilt off of people. Collectively, we have karma. Collectively, we're going to bequeath our children and their children and their children, some kind of world if we get that far. So I think that why Buddha is still popular today, or this theory, is that they don't really want to get involved in questions that don't have good answers. But they have a lot of wisdom about how to be happy in your current life. And those things include this little 8-step plan that he's got. I want to read that to you. This is the 8 steps. You probably have come across this before. So here they are. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort. And these last two are the boogers, right mindfulness and right concentration. So the first six are pretty easy, right view. You know, you're supposed to remain optimistic. You're supposed to be open to learning. You hear a lot about beginner's mind in Buddhism. And what they're saying is don't get so uppity that you can't hear stuff. You know, that's pretty simple stuff. Right intention. Well, what are your intentions? You know, are we passive aggressive? You know, may look like a good intention, but not quite. When we say right speech, what they're hitting at is don't talk about your neighbors in a bad way. Don't tell them lies. Don't tell yourself lies. Right action. Well, there's where your karma comes from, right? That's where our karma comes from. It's where the world's karma comes from. So right effort, that means you have to stay at it even on the days when you think, oh, this is a crock. You know, I'm tired of doing this. I don't want to do this. I'd rather do something else. I'd rather go to a party that I can handle today. So when you get to the last two, right mindfulness and right concentration, those are two things that come straight out of the ancient school of yoga. At the time when he was a young man, Siddhartha, he got exposed to these two things, traveling with the yogis. And what right concentration is about is to be able to tame your mind. If we had time today, we could sit here and we could have a little meditation, and I would ask you, don't really try to do anything other than watch what kind of thoughts go through your head. Just look at them. Just take a while and just look at those. Don't try to make them do anything. Just notice them, and then they'll pass away and another one will take its place, and look at those things. And that's what's having a big influence on how things go in your life. So what they understood and what Siddhartha understood is if you can get a little bit of awareness about what you think about and what you let go through there, or what snagged you and takes you so far down the road, it takes years to get back, that's what we need to learn how to do. So that was concentration. And the best way to do this is to learn to focus on one thing. Traditionally in Buddhism, that's been your breath. You just watch your breath. That's really hard for most Westerners. What we do better with is something maybe like a mantra. And we just say the mantra, but you think about the mantra and you try to get wisdom from that. I think the last time I was here, I talked about a mantra that I had been using for 2 years because I needed remediation. So I used it for 2 years, and it really made a difference in my happiness of doing that. So anyway, before you can really get into the deeper realms of mindfulness, you need to learn, you need to teach your brain how to do things. And it's within possibility for each of us, but it's really hard. So most of us give up pretty quickly. I have a friend who said, oh, I'm no good at meditation, so I'm not going to do it. I'm thinking, well, hell, you know, if we only did it because we're good at it, no one would be meditating, because it's true, it's difficult. So if we were to work at these two things at the same time, working with your mind to concentrate on just one thing, and then be able to do what in Sanskrit is called Vipassana, which is mindfulness. And that's really just to learn how to watch your thoughts. So concentration teaches you how to do one thing, how to really focus, really focus, really focus, really focus. If it's on your breath, or if it's on a mantra, or if it's just on what are you feeling inside your body, and stay with that instead of, oh, this body's got to go to the Ingalls after I do this. And so do I need eggs? No, I don't think I need eggs, but oh gosh, I forgot to pick the clothes out of the dryer. You know, and so we have to learn, you know, that those things are inhibiting our being able to do this. The other stuff, like having right livelihood, they were talking about don't do anything violent in your job. No fighting, no killing. So that would eliminate a lot of jobs that we would ordinarily probably do, like we wouldn't be a butcher or we wouldn't be a lawyer. So that I didn't decide that, but I've read commentary on it. When people are trying to sort out, okay, well now what is right livelihood? Just what is it? I think probably Siddhartha would say you've got to find that within yourself. You have to figure that out for yourself. And so his what he wanted people to know is that this part of you that can do these things is in there, but we have to unwrap it because it's covered up with all of these things that keep it so closed off, like our busyness, our resentments. Oh, that's a really good one. It kind of keeps it stuffed down and packed in there, where if we can be more loving and open and listen more than we talk, and not be quite as selfish as we are, and not want more than we need, it's those kind of things that he wants us to focus on, or that he was wanting people at the time to focus on. We don't need more of things. And I'm always amused by preachers sometimes who will tell us, you can have anything you want, as long as you learn to think the right way, then you can have anything you want. And I think that's a little abusive to the people he's telling that to, or she's telling that to, when really what we have to do is to learn how to want the right things. It's not wanting something and then thinking our way up to get it, but to open our minds to wanting the right thing, which is listen to other people, be nice to people. If you have extra, give it to them. Don't be verbally abusive. It's all the things we know already. We just need to unwrap this little package that keeps all of that hold in. So, like I said, Buddhism has been chasing me for years, ever since I read the book Siddhartha. Came across some of the teachings in yoga and then in Buddhism in 1988. Everywhere I go, I get bombarded with stuff. In 1988, I went on a vacation to Mexico and stayed at this place called the Amigo Hotel. It was on a beach, and the desk clerk was this nice little fellow who grew up in Mexico City. And I came back from the beach one day and he said, I have something for you. I said, oh, what is it? He said, it's a book. So this was in 1988. And so I've carried this book around with me since then. It was precious, even though I didn't understand it. The first time I read it, which was when he gave it to me in 1988, I go, oh yeah. And I read through and it was words. I read it and I could say I read it. I didn't grasp it, but I read it. And then, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, I read it again. And I thought, oh, this is really kind of good. I'm going to keep this book. And then I read it about 3 weeks ago. And I said, wow, this is really a good book. and I thought back and I said, well, I was just dumb as a rock. When I read the first time, I didn't get anything out of it, but it was dear to me because he gave it to me, and and it became a treasure. And so now I don't think I'll ever let go of it. And I'm going to reread it, and I'll probably get a whole lot more out of it now than I did at my last reading. And the reason that I say that is, I'm glad that I did this, because I can say, well, I really have grown some. I'm not there by any means. I'm still a brat. still do things I shouldn't, get angry, have resentments, all of those things that catch us. But when I can look back and say, wow, there was a time when I didn't get anything out of this book. And now that I'm reading it again, it's like, wow, that's huge. I have to laugh at myself, but I have to be kind too, because I'm in love with this stuff. I can't help it, and I know most people aren't. Most people don't really care about the history of it, but to me, that's part of the fullness of it. Is it's managed to last for 2,500 years. It's pretty nice stuff. Anyway, like I said, I can't get away from it. I tried to be a snowbird one time. I lived down near Fort Myers, Florida. The weather was wonderful, but we didn't meet our tribe there, really. But on this little tiny island where we lived, called Pine Island, there was a Buddhist group. I said, oh, they had a little spread in our local mullet wrapper, the newspaper. It says, oh, look, a Tibetan monk is coming to Pine Island to the Buddhist Center. Well, the Buddhist Center was Gary Pearson's house. That was the Buddhist Center. So I went over there on the appointed day when he was there, and there was this guy, Geshe Pelge. I think I told you about him when I was here last, but he was a pretty important person in Tibetan Buddhism. And I really didn't get that until long after he had left. But at the urging of my friend Gary Pearson of the Buddhist Center of Pine Island, I took my vows with Geshe Pelge, and it was a wonderful thing. Again, it was a whole lot like reading this book the first time, because the whole thing was in Tibetan, or Sanskrit, and I didn't know what I was saying. I was able to follow the directions and do what he said. But in essence, what I did was I made a statement that I believe the Buddha really did find something. And the second thing was that I am willing to scratch through his teachings to see what I can get out of it in order to be a better person, in order to be happy selfishly. And then the third thing was, I believe in the power of the Sangha. And a Sangha is what you are, what we are in here today. We're a group of people who are interested in this and would be willing to be with each other at a time and talk about these things. That's a Sangha. So I did that, and that was not hard at all. I didn't bristle at any of that. The worst part was I had to lie down face down on the floor with my arms stretched out in front, saying words that I could hardly pronounce. Probably got carpet fur in my mouth. But it was a good experience. I'm glad I did it. And again, this stuff is chasing me as much as I'm chasing it. So that's my story with Buddhism. What's yours? Thank you.
Tom, what's the book that you've been holding up?
It's called A Gradual Awakening, and it's by Stephen Levine. And Stephen Levine he's been around for a long time. He used to be the editor of a magazine called New Age magazine back in the day. He was also an editor for a while of Yoga Journal. And then he became really good friends with Ram Dass, and they wrote a book together. And then he just studied with a lot of the people who came from other countries, studied Buddhism. So he was a young man when he wrote this. I'll tell you how young he was. This book only cost $5.95 then. That's how young he was. Well, thank you for giving me your attention today and listening to me. I really value that, like anybody would. And I wish peace and blessings to each and every one of you.